Louis Armstrong was counting money in his hotel room when the knock came. Not the gentle rap of room service or the excited tapping of a fan hoping for an autograph. This was the authoritative hammering of someone who expected immediate answers. It was 2 a.m. in Chicago, December 1943, and Louis had just finished the most emotionally draining performance of his career. But the real battle was about to begin. The man standing in the hallway wore a $1,000 suit and a smile that could freeze hell. Victor Sterling, senior executive at Decca Records, had traveled from New York specifically for this conversation. In his briefcase were photographs, bank statements, and enough evidence to destroy not just Louis Armstrong's career, but the secret that had consumed his heart and his savings for the past 3 years. "Mr. Armstrong," Sterling said, pushing his way into the room without invitation, "we need to talk about your little charity project." What Sterling didn't understand was that he wasn't just threatening Louis Armstrong's business interests. He was threatening the thing that gave Louis's life meaning beyond the music, beyond the fame, beyond the applause. He was threatening the Treme Angels Music Academy, a secret school in the poorest neighborhood of New Orleans where 42 children learned trumpet, piano, and hope from teachers Louis paid out of his own pocket. And when you threaten what Louis Armstrong loves, you discover that the man behind the smile can be more dangerous than any gangster, more ruthless than any businessman, and more protective than any father. This is the story of the war nobody knew about, the school that changed everything, and the night Louis Armstrong proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a trumpet. Sometimes it's truth. To understand why Victor Sterling's threat cut so deep, you have to understand what the Treme Angels meant to Louis Armstrong. It wasn't just charity. It wasn't just guilt money from a successful man trying to buy his way into heaven. It was his attempt to repay a debt that couldn't be measured in dollars. Louis had grown up in the Treme, in a shotgun house where the walls were so thin you could hear your neighbor's dreams and nightmares. His mother, Mayan, had worked herself to the bone just to keep food on the table. There had been no money for music lessons, no chance for formal training. Louis had learned trumpet the hard way, by listening, by practicing until his lips bled, by stealing moments with broken instruments that other people had thrown away. The only reason Louis Armstrong existed was because of Joe King Oliver, who had seen a skinny kid with hungry eyes and decided to take a chance. Oliver had given Louis his first real lessons, his first professional job, his first glimpse of what music could become when it was nurtured and supported. Without King Oliver's generosity, Louis Armstrong would have remained Louis Daniel Armstrong, laborer, forgotten by history. So, in 1940, when Louis was 39 years old and financially secure for the first time in his life, he had returned to the Treme with a plan. He rented a warehouse on Dumaine Street, fixed it up, bought instruments, and hired 3 teachers. The Treme Angels Music Academy opened quietly, with no fanfare, no press releases, no publicity. Just 12 kids from families who couldn't afford music lessons, getting the chance Louis had dreamed of as a child. The school was Louis's deepest secret. He told no one except his wife, Lucille, and his accountant, who begged him to stop the monthly payments that were bleeding his savings dry. Louis paid the teachers' salaries, bought the instruments, fixed the roof when it leaked, and even provided lunch for kids who came to school hungry. By 1943, the school served 42 students, ranging from 6-year-old Anna Boudreau, who played piano like she was channeling angels, to 17-year-old Marcus Thibodeau, whose trumpet tone was so pure it made grown men cry. Louis visited whenever he could, slipping into New Orleans between tours, sitting in the back of the classroom while the children practiced scales and learned the basics of rhythm and melody. He never played for them, never revealed his identity. He was just Mr. Louis, a generous benefactor who cared enough to watch them grow. But the school was expensive. More expensive than Louis had anticipated. In 1943, he was spending nearly 60% of his income on the Treme Angels, living modestly while pouring his heart and his bank account into 42 young dreams. His record sales were strong, his touring schedule was packed, but the math was becoming impossible. Louis Armstrong was going broke trying to save the future of music. That's when Victor Sterling noticed the money. Record executives in the 1940s were accountants with delusions of artistic grandeur. They watched their artists' finances the way hawks watch field mice, always looking for leverage, always searching for weakness. Sterling had been monitoring Louis' spending patterns for months, trying to understand why one of Decca's biggest stars was living like a session musician. The investigation Sterling ordered revealed everything: bank transfers to New Orleans, payments to unknown teachers, equipment purchases that couldn't be explained by Lewis's known activities. Sterling had hired a private detective who had followed the money trail to a warehouse in the Trem, where dozens of black children gathered every day to learn music from teachers who were being paid by Louis Armstrong. To Sterling, this was a scandal waiting to happen. A black entertainer secretly funding a school for poor children? In 1943, America, that was dangerous territory. It suggested social activism, political consciousness, the kind of thinking that made white audiences nervous. Worse, it was bleeding money that could be flowing to Decca Records in the form of better contracts and exclusive deals. Sterling had flown to Chicago with a simple ultimatum: close the school or lose the record contract. "Sit down, Louis," Sterling said, making himself comfortable in the hotel room's only chair. "Let's talk business." Louis remained standing. Something in Sterling's tone triggered the survival instincts he'd learned growing up poor in New Orleans. This man was dangerous, not because he carried a gun, but because he carried the power to destroy dreams. "What kind of business, Mr. Sterling?" Sterling opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "The kind where we discuss your extracurricular activities, specifically your little music school in New Orleans." Louis felt his blood run cold. Nobody was supposed to know about the Treme Angels. The teachers had signed confidentiality agreements. The students' families had been carefully selected for their discretion. How had word gotten out? "I don't know what you're talking about," Louis said carefully. Sterling laughed and pulled out a photograph. It showed Louis sitting in the back of a classroom, watching Anna Boudreau practice piano. The image was grainy, obviously taken from a distance, but unmistakably authentic. "Really? Because I have 12 more photos just like this one, plus bank records, payroll statements, and testimony from 3 different witnesses who can place you at this, what do you call it, the Trem Angels Music Academy?" Sterling savored the words like fine wine. He was enjoying this. "Here's what's going to happen, Louis. You're going to close that school. You're going to stop throwing away money on charity cases who will never amount to anything. And you're going to focus on what you do best, making records that sell and keeping Decca Records profitable." Louis looked at the photograph of Anna at the piano. 6 years old, her tiny fingers reaching for keys that seemed miles apart, her face screwed up in concentration as she worked through a simple melody. Anna, who walked 3 miles to school every day because her family couldn't afford car fare. Anna, who had already progressed further in 6 months than most students did in 2 years. "And if I refuse?" Louis asked. Sterling's smile widened. "Then I release these photos to every newspaper in the South. I tell them that Louis Armstrong is secretly funding a school for black children, trying to give them ideas above their station. I explain how you're using white people's money, because let's face it, most of your audience is white, to support integration and social change." The threat was clear. In 1943, America, accusations of social activism could destroy a black entertainer's career overnight. Southern venues would cancel his shows. Radio stations would stop playing his records. The careful balance Louis had maintained between entertaining white audiences and maintaining his dignity as a black man would collapse. "Plus," Sterling continued, "Decca Records will terminate your contract for violation of the morality clause. You'll be finished in the music business, Louis. All because you couldn't mind your own business." Louis stared at the photograph for a long moment. He thought about Marcus Thibodeau, whose trumpet playing had improved so dramatically that he was ready for professional work. He thought about little Anna, who dreamed of playing Carnegie Hall someday. He thought about 42 children who came to school every day believing that music could lift them out of poverty, just as it had lifted Louis. Then Louis Armstrong did something that surprised Victor Sterling. He started laughing. It wasn't the jolly chuckle that audiences expected from Satchmo. It was something darker, older, forged in the streets of New Orleans, and tempered by years of dealing with men who thought they owned him. It was the laugh of a man who had faced down worse threats than this and survived. "Mr. Sterling," Louis said, still chuckling, "I think you made a mistake coming here tonight." Sterling's confidence wavered slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you don't know who you're dealing with. You think I'm just some entertainer, some dancing fool who'll do whatever you say to protect his career, but you forgot something important." Louis walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. The city was dark except for the scattered lights of people working night shifts, struggling to make ends meet. just like he had when he was young. You forgot that I grew up in New Orleans, and in New Orleans we know how to handle bullies. Sterling's hand moved to his briefcase as if the legal documents inside could protect him from whatever Louis was planning. Are you threatening me, Armstrong? Louis turned back to face him. Mr. Sterling, I'm not threatening you. I'm educating you. What happened next became legend in the music business, though the full story wasn't told until years later. Louis Armstrong didn't beg. He didn't negotiate. He didn't try to cut a deal. Instead, he picked up the phone and made 3 calls. The first call was to his lawyer, Glazer, who had been expecting this conversation for months. "Joe," Louis said calmly, "it's time for Plan B." The second call was to a contact at the Chicago Defender, the most influential black newspaper in America. "This is Louis Armstrong," he said. "I have a story for you." The third call was to King Oliver's nephew, a man who had followed his uncle into the music business but had ended up in management instead of performance. "Tell me," Louis said, "how would you like to start your own record label?" Sterling watched these conversations with growing alarm. This wasn't going according to script. Louis was supposed to fold, to accept the ultimatum, to choose his career over his charity. Instead, he was making moves that Sterling didn't understand. "What are you doing?" Sterling demanded. "I'm calling your bluff," Louis said, hanging up the phone. "See, Mr. Sterling, you made the same mistake a lot of people make. You assumed I need you more than you need me." Louis pulled out his own folder, one he'd been preparing for months with the help of lawyers who understood the music business better than Sterling did. "Did you know that my contract with Decca Records expires in 6 weeks? Did you know that I've been getting offers from other labels, offers that are twice what Decca is paying me? Did you know that I don't actually need you at all?" Sterling's face went pale. "That's impossible. You signed a 5-year deal." "I signed a 5-year deal with performance clauses," Louis corrected. "Clauses that allow me to break the contract if Decca doesn't meet certain sales targets. Targets that, according to my accountant, Decca failed to meet last quarter." This was the trap Louis had been setting for months. He'd suspected that Decca was underreporting his sales to avoid paying higher royalties. His investigation had revealed not just creative accounting, but outright fraud. Sterling didn't know it yet, but he was about to lose one of his biggest artists to a lawsuit that would expose Decca's illegal practices. "But that's not the best part," Louis continued. "The best part is what's going to happen when the Chicago Defender runs their story tomorrow morning. Louis Armstrong secretly funds music school for poor children. That's the headline. Below that will be photos of the children, interviews with the teachers, and a detailed explanation of how I've been using my own money to give opportunities to kids who reminded me of myself." Sterling was beginning to understand. This wasn't a scandal. This was a publicity goldmine. "The story will run in every black newspaper in the country within a week," Louis said. "And you know what white newspapers love more than scandal? They love a heartwarming story about a successful black man giving back to his community. Makes them feel good about buying his records." The phone rang. Louis answered it calmly. "Yes, this is Armstrong." "Really? That many already?" "Yes. I'll consider all offers." "Thank you." He hung up and smiled at Sterling. "That was RCA Records. Apparently word is already spreading about my contract situation. They'd like to meet next week." Sterling's carefully constructed threat was collapsing. Instead of destroying Louis Armstrong, the photos of the school were about to make him a national hero. Instead of weakening his negotiating position, Sterling's visit had given Louis the perfect opportunity to break free from Decca and sign a much more lucrative deal elsewhere. "This is insane," Sterling muttered. "You're risking everything for a bunch of kids who'll never amount to anything." That's when Louis Armstrong's mask finally slipped. The jovial entertainer disappeared, replaced by the man who had crawled out of the Trem through talent, determination, and the help of people who believed in him. "Mr. Sterling," Louis said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "let me tell you about those kids who'll never amount to anything. Anna Boudreau is 6 years old, and she can already play Mozart. Marcus Thibodeau is 17, and he sounds like Gabriel when he plays trumpet. There are 42 children in that school, and every one of them has more musical talent in their little finger than you have in your entire body." Louis walked closer to Sterling, who was beginning to look genuinely frightened. "You want to destroy that school because you're afraid. Afraid that if poor black children get the same opportunities as rich white children, you might have to actually compete on merit instead of money. Afraid that the world might change, might get better, might leave men like you behind." Sterling stood up, gathering his papers. "This isn't over, Armstrong." "Yes, it is," Louis said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." The next morning, the Chicago Defender ran the story exactly as Louis had promised. Louis Armstrong's secret school transforms lives in New Orleans. The article included photos of the children practicing, interviews with grateful parents, and a detailed account of Louis's quiet generosity. Within hours, the story was picked up by newspapers across the country. Instead of scandal, the coverage was overwhelmingly positive. Radio hosts praised Louis's philanthropy. Other musicians announced their own charitable projects. The Trem Angels Music Academy became a symbol of hope and possibility. More importantly, the story triggered an avalanche of donations. People sent money, instruments, and offers of support from across America. Within a month, the school had enough funding to operate for 5 years without Louis's personal contributions. RCA Records offered Louis a contract that doubled his income and gave him creative control over his recordings. He accepted, using the signing bonus to expand the Trem Angels to serve 100 students. Victor Sterling was quietly fired from Decca Records when the company's accounting irregularities became public. He never worked in the music industry again. But the real victory wasn't professional or financial. It was what happened 5 years later when 17-year-old Anna Boudreau received a full scholarship to Juilliard. Or when Marcus Thibodeau formed his own band and started recording. Or when 42 children who had grown up believing that music could change their lives proved it by changing the world, one note at a time. In 1950, Louis Armstrong returned to the Trem Angels for a special concert. The school had expanded to 3 buildings and served over 200 students. Anna, now 11, played a piano solo that brought the audience to tears. Marcus, now 22 and a professional musician, joined Louis for a trumpet duet that seemed to make the walls themselves sing. After the concert, Anna approached Louis backstage. She was shy, still the same little girl whose concentration had impressed him in that first photograph. "Mr. Louis," she said, "I wanted to thank you for everything you did for us." Louis knelt down to her level. "Sweetheart, you don't need to thank me. You did all the work. I just made sure you had the chance." Anna smiled and handed him a handwritten note. "I wrote this for you," she said. Louis unfolded the paper. In careful cursive, Anna had written, "Music doesn't just change the person who plays it. It changes everyone who hears it. Thank you for teaching us that our music matters." That note stayed in Louis Armstrong's wallet for the rest of his life. Long after the Trem Angels had graduated students who went on to play in symphony orchestras and jazz clubs around the world. Long after Anna Boudreau became the first black woman to win the International Piano Competition at Carnegie Hall. Long after Marcus Thibodeau's band recorded an album that topped the jazz charts for 6 months. When Louis Armstrong died in 1971, his funeral was attended by hundreds of musicians, celebrities, and world leaders. But in the front row sat 42 men and women who had something more valuable than fame or fortune to remember him by. They had the gift he'd given them as children, the belief that music could overcome anything, even poverty, even prejudice, even the cruelty of men like Victor Sterling. The Trem Angels Music Academy still operates today, funded by a trust Louis established in his will. Over the past 80 years, it has graduated more than 3,000 musicians, composers, and music teachers. But more than that, it has proven that sometimes the most important battle isn't for fame or fortune. Sometimes it's for the simple right to dream, to learn, to grow, to believe that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. Victor Sterling thought he could destroy Louis Armstrong with threats and blackmail. What he discovered was that threatening a man's charity is like threatening his children. And when you threaten what Louis Armstrong loved, you learned that the man behind the smile was fiercer than any hurricane, more determined than any flood, more protective than any force on earth. The children of the Trem didn't just learn music from Louis Armstrong. They learned that success means nothing if you don't use it to lift others up. They learned that talent without opportunity is tragedy, but opportunity without talent is waste. And they learned that sometimes the most beautiful music isn't played on an instrument at all. Sometimes it's played on the heartstrings of children who just need someone to believe in them. That's the secret Victor Sterling never understood. Louis Armstrong wasn't just teaching music, he was teaching hope. And hope, once it takes root in a child's heart, becomes unstoppable. It grows into dreams, and dreams become reality, and reality becomes the song that changes the world. What wonderful music that makes.